The sun had set over the village of Asante, casting an orange glow over the red clay houses. The community gathered in the open square, where Chief Ose, the patriarch of the village, had called a meeting to announce the fate of his wealth and property. His voice echoed across the space, firm yet filled with a hint of nostalgia. "We must discuss the inheritance of my wealth," he began, his words resonating with importance. "It is time to prepare for my departure from this world. And as tradition dictates, I will pass on my lands and wealth to one among you. It is only right that you all know how things will proceed." Kofi, the eldest son, stood tall, his face a mixture of anticipation and calculation. Amina, his younger sister, was beside him, her eyes filled with a quiet apprehension. The villagers murmured among themselves, knowing that the chief's wealth was substantial. Land, cattle, and gold, enough to change the fate of anyone who inherited it. The family gathered in the modest but cozy compound of Chief Ose's home. The air was thick with tension as the siblings sat in the courtyard. Kofi looked at his father with longing, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Amina sat across from him, unaware of the storm brewing in her brother's heart. "Father," Kofi spoke with reverence, "do you think I am ready to inherit what you have worked so hard for? I have always been loyal to you, always followed your guidance." Chief Ose looked at him, pride shining in his eyes. "Kofi, you are my firstborn. You will be the one to carry the torch, but I must make sure the decision is just. Your sister Amina has proven herself wise and capable, but the time has come for me to choose." Amina smiled gently, always the peacemaker. "I am happy with whatever decision you make, father," she said, her voice soft. She trusted Kofi, perhaps too much, believing that the family's bond would outweigh any greed. Later that night, Kofi sat alone in the dim light of his room, the moon casting shadows across his face. He clenched his fists. He had always known that the inheritance would come down to a choice between him and Amina, but the truth of it weighed heavily on him now. In the quiet of his thoughts, a sinister plan began to form. The wealth his father had amassed would secure his future, and with the lands, he could build an empire. But Amina stood in his way. She was too good, too innocent to see the danger that lurked in her own family. He began to devise a way to remove her from the equation without drawing suspicion. A little poison, enough to incapacitate her, would do the trick. It was perfect. The inheritance would be his, and no one would question it. Amina sat in the garden the next morning, her hands gently tending to the flowers. She hummed softly, unaware of the dark thoughts consuming her brother. Her world was simple: the love of her family, the beauty of nature, and the knowledge that they would all prosper together. Her mind wandered to the future, to the possibilities of working alongside her father and brother in the family's ventures. She never imagined that her own brother could harbor such jealousy and resentment. As she worked, Kofi approached her, his face a picture of calm. "Amina," he said with a smile, "I'm glad to see you so content. I want to make sure that our family remains strong, no matter what happens." Amina looked up at him, her expression full of love and trust. "Of course, Kofi. We're a family, and nothing can break that bond." But in Kofi's heart, the seed of betrayal had already been planted. The next day, Chief Ose called a private meeting with his children. The tension in the air was palpable as they gathered in his chamber. His face was grim, his eyes betraying a weariness that spoke of the burden of leadership. "I have made my decision," Chief Osei said, his voice steady. "The inheritance will be passed to the one who shows the most dedication, the one who can best lead our family into the future." Kofi leaned forward, eager for the confirmation of his future. Amina's heart fluttered with anxiety, but she said nothing. She had always trusted her father's wisdom. The chief turned to Kofi first. "You, my son, have proven yourself capable, and I am proud of you. But Amina has also demonstrated strength in her own right. This decision is not easy." Amina's eyes shone with tears, not of fear, but of love and respect for her father's wisdom. "I will announce my decision soon," Chief Osei continued, his voice filled with a deep sense of responsibility. "But it will be you, my children, who will shape the future of our family." The days following Chief Osei's announcement were filled with tension. Kofi had not slept well, his mind racing with the implications of his father's words. Amina was content, too trusting, too innocent to understand the struggle that raged inside her brother. Kofi knew that the decision was looming, and he could not afford to let his sister stand in his way. He had always been the firstborn, the one who carried the burden of leadership. But Amina was a threat. She was smart, compassionate, and her father adored her. He walked through the marketplace, his eyes scanning the bustling crowd for a familiar face. His thoughts were interrupted by a figure he had not seen in years. Nana Adaora, the herbalist. She was an old woman, known for her knowledge of herbs, potions, and remedies. Her eyes met his with knowing intensity, and Kofi felt a shiver run down his spine. "Young man, I have not seen you in some time," Nana Adaora said, her voice a gravelly whisper. "You look troubled, Kofi. What weighs on your heart?" Kofi hesitated, glancing around to ensure no one could hear. "I need something to help me solve a problem," he said, his voice low. The herbalist raised an eyebrow. "A problem? There are many kinds of problems, but you seek something that only I can provide." Kofi nodded, his heart pounding. "A way to ensure that the inheritance falls to me. A way to make sure my sister is no longer a threat." Nana Adaora studied him for a moment, then turned away, rummaging through her collection of herbs. "There are ways, young man, but they come at a cost." Kofi was desperate. "I'll pay whatever it takes." She returned to him with a small vial filled with a thick, dark liquid. "This will do the job. Just a few drops in her food or drink, and your sister will fall ill. It will look like an accident, and no one will question it." Kofi took the vial, his fingers trembling. He knew that once he took this step, there would be no turning back. Back at home, Amina was completely unaware of the dark plot that had been set in motion against her. She spent her days helping her mother, Mama Efua, with chores around the house. They laughed together, sharing stories of the past, of the old days when life was simpler. "Mother, do you think father will choose Kofi to inherit everything?" Amina asked one afternoon, as they sat under the shade of a tree. Mama Efua paused for a moment, her hands stilling as she looked at her daughter. "Your father loves you both, Amina. It will be his decision to make. But remember, the wealth is not what matters. It's the bond of family, the love we share, that is truly precious." Amina smiled, though she couldn't help but feel a tinge of uncertainty. "I just want to make him proud." Mama Efua placed a gentle hand on Amina's shoulder. "You already have, my dear. Never forget that." Meanwhile, Kofi was in his room, contemplating the vial in his hands. His heart ached with guilt, but the hunger for power and wealth overshadowed his conscience. He could almost taste the land, the cattle, the riches that would soon be his. Amina's innocence would be his ticket to everything he had ever wanted. That evening, the family gathered for dinner. The table was set with a large bowl of jollof rice, grilled meat, and vegetables. Kofi watched as Amina helped serve the food, her laughter filling the air. She was so full of life, so carefree. He took a deep breath, his hand shaking slightly as he reached for the vial. He added a single drop to Amina's drink, his heart pounding in his chest. It was the moment of no return. Amina sat down beside him, oblivious to the dark act unfolding in front of her. "I've made your favorite Kofi," she said, offering him a plate of food. Kofi smiled, masking his inner turmoil. "Thank you, Amina. It's delicious." The meal continued in relative peace, with Amina smiling and talking about the future. But underneath the surface, Kofi was waiting, watching for the poison to take effect. It wasn't long before Amina began to feel strange. At first, it was a slight dizziness, a lightheadedness that she brushed off as fatigue. But as the night wore on, her condition worsened. She excused herself from the table, stumbling toward her room. Kofi watched her leave, his heart beating faster with every step. He had done it. He had taken the first step toward his inheritance, toward his future. Amina lay down on her bed, her body growing colder by the minute. Her vision blurred, and she felt as though the room was spinning around her. She tried to call for her mother, but her voice was weak, a mere whisper. Mama Efua entered the room when she heard Amina's faint voice. "Amina," she called softly, her heart sinking when she saw her daughter's pale face. Amina tried to sit up, but collapsed back onto the bed, shivering. "Mother, I don't feel well. Something is wrong." Mama Efua rushed to her side, brushing her daughter's damp hair away from her forehead. "Don't worry, my dear. I will get your father." But before she could leave, Kofi appeared in the doorway, his face a picture of concern. "What's happening to Amina, mother? She looks so pale." Mama Efua looked at her son, her eyes narrowing slightly. "She needs rest, Kofi. Perhaps some water and a little food will help her." Kofi nodded, though a flicker of unease crossed his face. Inside, he was torn between guilt and triumph. His plan was working, and soon the inheritance would be his. But deep down, a nagging feeling began to grow. Could he live with what he had done? The next few days were filled with concern as Amina's condition worsened. Mama Efua tended to her daughter with a level of care that spoke of a mother's deep love, but Amina's fever would not break. The village healer was summoned, but even her expertise could not provide an explanation for Amina's sudden illness. Kofi's outward appearance was calm, but inside, a storm raged. The guilt gnawed at him, especially as he watched his mother's worry deepen. Every time she glanced at him, he saw a flicker of suspicion in her eyes. Did she know? Did she sense something was wrong? Amina's condition grew more critical with each passing day. Her once bright eyes were now dull, her energy drained. Kofi had never seen her so weak, so vulnerable. Yet, in the back of his mind, he justified his actions. This was for the family's future, he reminded himself. Amina would be fine soon, he was sure of it. Then, the inheritance would be his, and everything would return to normal. One evening, as Mama Efua sat by Amina's side, she turned to Kofi. her gaze steady and piercing. "Kofi," she began softly, "tell me, have you seen anything strange lately? Have you noticed anything unusual about your sister's illness?" Kofi froze for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. His mother's intuition had always been sharp, but he had never expected her to question him so directly. He forced a smile, trying to mask the unease that gripped him. "I don't know, mother," he replied, his voice steady but too smooth. "It's all so sudden. Maybe it's just a fever that hasn't passed yet." Mama Efua studied him for a moment longer, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "I hope that's all it is. But you must remember, Kofi, that nothing is ever truly what it seems. There are things in this world that we cannot understand. Sometimes we are tested in ways we least expect." Kofi's stomach churned, and he turned away, eager to escape the weight of her gaze. "I'll go see to the preparations for Father's meeting tomorrow. I'm sure Amina will feel better by then." Late that night, Mama Efua could not shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She decided to take matters into her own hands. Quietly, she slipped into the kitchen, where the food had been prepared the night Amina fell ill. She inspected everything carefully, looking for anything out of the ordinary. It wasn't until she opened a small jar of spices that she found it. Something was missing. A small vial, tucked away at the back of the shelf, caught her attention. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the label on the vial. "Poison," it read. The vial was nearly empty. Mama Efua's breath caught in her throat as she remembered something she had overlooked earlier. Kofi had been acting strange that evening, a little too eager to serve Amina her meal. Had he done this to his own sister? The realization hit her like a hammer. Her mind raced. She had to confront him. But how could she accuse her own son of such a horrific act? The next morning, as the sun began to rise, Mama Efua found Kofi alone in the yard. His back was to her, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling, and stepped forward. "Kofi," she called, her voice shaking but firm. "We need to talk." Kofi turned, his face masked with concern. "Mother, is Amina feeling any better?" "I'm asking the questions now," Mama Efua replied, her voice hardening. "Did you poison your sister?" Kofi's eyes widened in shock, his breath catching in his throat. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond. His heart raced, and his mind spun with excuses, with lies. But he knew there was no way out. His mother had discovered the truth. "Mother, he began. But Mama Efua raised her hand to silence him. "How could you?" she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Your own sister, Kofi, the one person who trusted you, the one who loved you unconditionally. How could you betray her like this?" Kofi's mind raced as he tried to justify his actions. "Mother, I did what I had to do. Amina, she stood in the way. She's too kind, too trusting. Father would never give the inheritance to someone like me if she's around. I needed to be the one." Mama Efua shook her head in disbelief. "This is not the way, Kofi. The inheritance is not worth this. You have lost your soul in your pursuit of power, and if you do not change, you will lose everything." Kofi stood there, his mind a whirlwind of guilt, anger, and confusion. He knew his mother was right, but the desire for the wealth, the land, the power, it consumed him. Meanwhile, Amina was not completely unaware. Despite her weakened state, her mind began to clear. She had heard fragments of the conversation between her mother and Kofi. Her senses, dulled by the poison, slowly started to come back to her. She felt the cold sweat on her brow, the nausea in her stomach, but she fought through it. She had been betrayed by the person she trusted most, her own brother. As her mother left to prepare for a confrontation with Kofi, Amina's heart swelled with both sorrow and strength. She was not going to let this betrayal define her. She would fight to expose the truth and protect her family from Kofi's greed. With trembling hands, Amina tried to sit up, her body weak but determined. It was time to take back control of her life. Kofi spent the rest of the day in a haze. The confrontation with his mother had shaken him to his core, but his desire to secure the inheritance was still all-consuming. The walls of the house felt like they were closing in on him as he tried to rationalize his actions. He sat alone in his room, hands clenched tightly, staring out of the window. His mind wandered back to the conversation with Nana Adaora. The poison had been a means to an end, one he believed would make everything better. Now, however, it seemed like he had made the biggest mistake of his life. But there was no turning back. He had already done it. He had already made his choice. In a moment of desperation, he stood up and paced the room, his hands shaking. "I did what I had to do," he muttered to himself, trying to convince his conscience. "I need to secure the future, to protect this family. Amina is strong. She will understand." But deep down, Kofi knew he was lying to himself. The truth was clear, and he was running from it. He had betrayed the one person who had always supported him. Meanwhile, Amina had managed to summon all her remaining strength. She knew she had to act quickly. Her brother's betrayal had left her with more than just physical pain. She was heartbroken, but she was also determined. Her survival depended on her ability to stand up for herself, and she wouldn't let Kofi's actions break her spirit. With difficulty, Amina rose from her bed, her legs weak beneath her. She moved slowly, each step more painful than the last, but she was resolute. She needed to find her mother and confront Kofi together. She would not let him get away with this. She found Mama Efua in the kitchen, preparing a pot of soup. Amina's voice was faint, but steady. "Mother, I remember everything." Mama Efua turned quickly, her voice filled with both concern and relief. "Amina, you're awake." She rushed to her daughter's side, helping her sit down. "You've been so ill. You need to rest." Amina smiled weakly, shaking her head. "No, mother. I need to confront Kofi. I know what he did to me." Mama Efua's face paled, and her eyes filled with tears. "My child, I've already spoken to him. I confronted him with the truth. He has admitted to it." Amina nodded, determination in her eyes. "It's not enough, mother. He has to face the consequences of his actions. I won't let him get away with poisoning me." Mama Efua's heart sank. She had hoped Kofi might see reason, but the truth was undeniable now. Her own son had betrayed his sister for wealth. The family would never be the same again. Amina, with Mama Efua's help, slowly made her way to Kofi's room. Kofi was sitting on his bed, lost in thought, when he heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching. He looked up to find Amina standing in the doorway, her expression one of quiet strength, though her body still bore the marks of her illness. "You poisoned me, Kofi," Amina said, her voice steady but full of pain. "You tried to kill me for what? For land? For power?" Kofi stood up quickly, his face pale. He wanted to speak, to explain, but the words stuck in his throat. His heart raced as he saw the fire in Amina's eyes. She was no longer the naive sister he had known. She was stronger than he had ever realized. "Please, Amina, Kofi began, his voice trembling. "No," Amina interrupted, her voice firm. "I don't want to hear your excuses. You made a choice. You chose greed over family, over love. I won't let you destroy us." Kofi took a step back, as if her words physically struck him. He opened his mouth to speak again, but Mama Efua, who had followed Amina into the room, spoke first. "You will leave this house, Kofi," Mama Efua said, her voice hard, her heart broken. "You have lost your place in this family. You are no longer welcome here." Kofi's face twisted with anger, but there was a flicker of something else. Fear. He realized, too late, that he had crossed a line that could never be undone. His obsession with the inheritance had cost him his family. "You can't do this," Kofi spat, his voice full of desperation. "I'm your son. I'm your firstborn. I deserve everything." Mama Efua's eyes burned with unshed tears. "You don't deserve anything, Kofi. Not after what you've done." Kofi stood frozen for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt the weight of his actions crashing down on him, but it was too late to undo what had been done. The inheritance that had once seemed like a dream was now an empty goal, a hollow victory. His eyes flicked between his mother and his sister. He had lost everything: his family, his honor, his future, but he refused to let them see his weakness. Without another word, Kofi turned and walked out of the house, his footsteps heavy with the knowledge that he had betrayed his own blood. The sound of his departure echoed in the silence that followed. The days that followed were filled with sorrow and silence. Amina's health slowly improved, though the emotional scars would take much longer to heal. Mama Efua and Amina spent their days in quiet reflection, grieving the loss of the brother and son they had once known. Amina's spirit, though wounded, remained strong. She had survived not just the poison, but the betrayal of someone she had loved and trusted. As she sat with her mother one evening, watching the sunset, she spoke softly. "Mother, I don't know how I can ever forgive him for what he did." Mama Efua placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Forgiveness is a long road, my dear. But the most important thing is that you are alive and you are free from his darkness. We will rebuild what has been broken." Amina nodded, knowing that the road ahead would be difficult. But she also knew that with the strength of her family, she could overcome anything. The inheritance, the wealth, it no longer mattered. What mattered was love, trust, and the bonds that held them together. Days passed, and life in the village slowly returned to its usual rhythm, though the shadows of Kofi's betrayal hung heavy over the family. Amina had recovered physically, but her heart still ached with the memory of her brother's treachery. Mama Efua too struggled to heal, her thoughts constantly drifting back to the son she had raised, now lost to his own greed. Chief Osei, who had remained silent throughout the ordeal, called for a family gathering. The inheritance that had been the source of so much turmoil had now become a matter of great importance once more. It was time for the chief to finally make his decision public, but there was an undeniable tension in the air. Kofi's absence loomed large. Amina and Mama Efua sat together in the chief's hut, surrounded by relatives and villagers, waiting for the chief to speak. Chief Osei had always been a wise man, beloved by the people, but today he seemed frailer than usual. His shoulders slumped, and his face, once filled with the fire of leadership, now bore the weight of a man who had witnessed the unraveling of his own bloodline. "I have seen much in my years," Chief Ose began, his voice heavy with grief. "And yet, nothing has hurt me more than the actions of my own son, Kofi." Amina's heart skipped a beat. Her father's words pierced through her, a reminder of the brother she had once loved, now lost to his ambitions. Her mother, sitting beside her, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "His desire for power blinded him," Chief Ose continued, his voice firm yet filled with sorrow. "And it is because of his betrayal that the inheritance must be reconsidered. The lands, the wealth, I will not pass them on to someone who cannot respect the bonds of family, who cannot honor the values we hold dear." Amina's heart ached at the thought of her father's pain. He had worked his entire life to build this legacy, but it had now been tainted by Kofi's greed. She glanced at her mother, whose eyes were filled with quiet sorrow, and for the first time, Amina understood the true weight of their loss. As the chief spoke, Amina found herself growing more resolute. The inheritance no longer mattered to her, not in the way it had once seemed so important. What mattered now was healing, rebuilding, and restoring the integrity of her family. "When Kofi left," Chief Ose said, his voice breaking slightly, "he abandoned not only his place in this family, but also his future. I will not reward such behavior with the wealth of this family." Amina, feeling a wave of courage wash over her, stood up slowly, her voice soft but clear. "Father, I don't want the inheritance either. I have no need for land or wealth. What I want is to restore our family, to bring back what was lost, not just the wealth, but the love, the trust, and the bond that once made us strong." Mama Efo looked at her daughter, a tear slipping down her cheek, and nodded in silent approval. The warmth of Amina's words filled the room, and for the first time in days, a sense of peace seemed to settle over the gathering. "You have spoken wisely, Amina," Chief Ose replied, a proud smile tugging at his lips. "The true inheritance of this family is not in the land or the gold, but in the love and respect we share. It is in the way we treat one another, in how we rebuild after tragedy." The room fell silent, and Amina knew in her heart that her father had made his final decision. The wealth would not be passed on to Kofi, but it would also not be used to divide the family further. It would be shared with the community, invested in projects that would help lift others up. Kofi's departure from the family was not met with anger, but with sorrow. The villagers who had once admired him now looked upon him with disdain. He had poisoned his sister for a fleeting dream of wealth, and in doing so, had lost the very thing that made him human. Though Kofi's absence left a hollow space in the family, Amina and Mama Afua were determined to move forward. Amina was the heart of the household, and she knew that her strength, her love, and her resilience would carry them through the storm. She would not let her brother's betrayal define her. One evening, as the sun set over the village, Amina and Mama Afua stood together outside their home, looking out over the land that had once been a symbol of their family's prosperity. It was now a symbol of their strength, their ability to overcome even the darkest of times. "We will rebuild," Amina said softly, her voice filled with determination. "We will create something beautiful from the ashes of this loss. This is our true inheritance." Mama Efwa smiled, her heart swelling with pride. Yes, my daughter. Together, we will rebuild, and we will honor the memory of all that has come before us. The villagers too rallied around Amina and Mama Efua. They had witnessed the pain the family had gone through, and they were determined to support them in any way they could. Chief Ose, now more fragile than ever, had made it clear that the community would share in the inheritance, using the wealth to improve the lives of everyone in the village. Amina, with her mother by her side, began to oversee the rebuilding of the family's farm. The land would be cultivated by many hands, not just theirs, and the profits would be shared equally among the villagers. Slowly, the sting of betrayal began to heal, replaced by a sense of unity and purpose. Kofi's absence was still felt, but it no longer overshadowed their lives. They had learned that wealth and power could never replace love, family, or the strength of community. The villagers were a reflection of this truth, and together, they forged a new path forward. As Amina stood on the hill overlooking the village one evening, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. The inheritance had been lost, but in its place, something far greater had emerged. A stronger, more united family, bound not by greed, but by love and shared purpose. Her brother's actions had left scars, but they had also shown her the true meaning of family. She understood now that the greatest inheritance was not something that could be passed down in a will. It was the strength to rise after betrayal, the courage to rebuild, and the love that transcended all else. And with that, Amina knew that in the end, she had inherited something far more valuable than land or wealth. She had inherited the legacy of love, family, and resilience. Months passed, and life in the village continued to evolve. Amina and Mama Efua had slowly begun to rebuild what Kofi had torn apart. The land, once a symbol of inheritance and power, was now a symbol of healing, shared with the village. The community worked together to till the soil, plant crops, and raise livestock. What had once been a divided family was now an extended network of neighbors, friends, and allies who had come together to create something far more meaningful. Amina's strength and leadership became apparent to everyone around her. She had taken charge not out of a desire for power, but from a deep sense of responsibility to her family, her community, and her father's legacy. She was no longer the vulnerable woman who had been poisoned by her brother's greed. She had emerged as a woman capable of leading, capable of building something from the ashes of betrayal. The land flourished under Amina's care. The village too began to thrive. Amina and her mother worked tirelessly to ensure that the wealth of the land was shared justly, helping those in need. In time, the people of Asante came to regard her not only as the daughter of Chief Ose, but as a leader in her own right. It was in these quiet, humble moments that Amina realized something profound. The inheritance she had once sought, the land, the cattle, the gold, had never been the true source of wealth. The true inheritance was the resilience of her spirit, the strength of her mother, and the love of the community that stood behind them. Together, they had built something far more valuable than riches. One quiet evening, as Amina stood at the edge of the village, overlooking the fields she had helped cultivate, a familiar figure appeared on the horizon. She squinted against the setting sun and saw a man walking toward her. His gait was slow and his posture bent under the weight of the journey he had undertaken. It was Kofi. Amina's heart sank. It had been months since he had left, and she had never expected him to return. She felt a wave of mixed emotions: anger, sorrow, but also a flicker of something else: pity. Kofi approached her cautiously, his face lined with regret and hardship. He looked nothing like the confident, ambitious man who had once poisoned her. He was thinner, his clothes tattered, and his eyes were dull, weighed down by the reality of his choices. "Amina," he said, his voice hoarse, I've lost everything. My pride, my family, my place in this world. I came back to beg for your forgiveness." Amina stood silent for a moment, watching him with a mixture of pain and resolve. She had suffered because of him, and the wounds ran deep. But she had also learned the power of forgiveness. She had learned that to carry the weight of hatred was to burden herself as much as the one who had wronged her. "You poisoned me, Kofi," Amina said, her voice steady but tinged with sorrow. "You destroyed everything we had. And for what? For land and gold. Power?" Kofi bowed his head in shame. "I thought I could buy my way into a future," he said quietly. "I thought wealth would give me everything I wanted. But all it did was take everything away. I didn't know how much I'd lose in the process. I can't undo what I did, but I can try to make it right." Amina felt the weight of his words. She had struggled with the idea of forgiveness, torn between the pain he had caused her and the realization that holding on to that pain would only make her more like him, consumed by greed and anger. After a long pause, Amina spoke, her voice calm but resolute. "I can't forgive you yet, Kofi, but I won't let you destroy yourself further. You can work with us. You can help rebuild what you tore down. But it will take time, and you will need to earn back the trust you lost." Kofi nodded, his eyes filled with both regret and gratitude. "I will do whatever it takes, Amina. I've learned my lesson. I'll work for the rest of my life to make amends." Amina looked at her brother, not with hatred, but with the understanding that he, too, had been broken. In that moment, she knew that true strength wasn't just about holding on. It was about letting go of the past and giving the future a chance. And so with time, Kofi began to rebuild, side by side with his sister and mother. The road to redemption was long, and forgiveness was still a work in progress. But the seeds of healing had been sown. As the sun set behind them, casting long shadows over the land they had reclaimed together, Amina stood tall, knowing that she had inherited something far greater than wealth. She had inherited the power of resilience, the strength to rebuild, and the courage to move forward, no matter the cost.